Hello everyone. Today we're going to delve into another distressing case. The Rose family tragedy stands out as one of the most perplexing and bewildering crimes in recent American history. Not only did it shock investigators with its callousness and brutality, but also with the involvement of close relatives as both victims and alleged perpetrators. Despite the passage of many years and the perpetrator serving a lengthy sentence, numerous questions and uncertainties linger. Doubts persist regarding the fairness of the court's judgment. Now let's delve into the heart of the matter. The Roses were a typical suburban family residing in Bristol, Tennessee, unnoticed by law enforcement until tragedy struck. Curtis and Lena Maria Rose, a long-married elderly couple, led the household for over 4 decades. Among their offspring, 2 daughters and 6 grandchildren existed, but our focus will center on those directly implicated in this notorious case. At the time of the crime, the household comprised Curtis and Lena Maria Rose, along with their eldest daughter, Toshia Milhorn, age 39, her husband James, and their 6 children. Among the children, 2 were Toshia and James's biological offspring, while the remaining 3 were from previous relationships. Additionally, a neighborhood girl had joined them for play. Notably, Toshia, James, and their children had been residing with Toshia's parents for approximately 2 months due to ongoing renovations at their own residence. Later, a pivotal figure in the unfolding events, 19-year-old Seth Denton, Toshia's eldest son, arrived at the house. His relationship with his mother and stepfather was severely strained, marked by a complete avoidance of communication. Their last encounter concluded tragically. Neighbors attested to the happiness and prosperity of the Rose couple, noting their daughter Toshia's contented marriage to James, an auto mechanic with a passion for restoring vintage cars. However, it was the family's own residence that became the site of the horrific incident. Responding police officers labeled it the most gruesome crime scene they had encountered and the bloodiest in the history of their tranquil county. The bodies of Lena Maria and Toshia, mother and daughter, were discovered inside the house, both shot at close range. Toshia was found seated at the dining room table, while Lena Maria lay on the floor nearby. Outside, James, Toshia's husband, lay critically wounded on the doorstep and was swiftly transported to the hospital. Despite medical efforts, he succumbed to extensive internal injuries and severe blood loss. Remarkably, none of the children present in the house sustained injuries, suggesting they were either not targeted or out of the shooter's line of sight during the adult victim's massacre. Shortly after the crime, the police received 2 consecutive phone calls. The first was from the homeowner, Curtis Rose, who claimed his eldest grandson, Seth, had committed the shooting and fled. However, Seth himself phoned in soon after, offering a conflicting narrative and placing blame on his grandfather, Curtis. Moreover, it emerged that Curtis had shot and wounded Seth in the arm, a fact Seth did not dispute, asserting that Curtis was attempting to detain him and prevent his escape from the scene of the massacre. Seth Denton, the suspected perpetrator, was apprehended at the hospital seeking medical aid for his wound. Subsequently, the investigation aimed to reconstruct the sequence of tragic events and uncover the truth behind the Rose family's ordeal. Strikingly, initially, only one version of events was considered for the investigation, with the second version receiving serious attention only several years later. Around 6:00 p.m. on August 29, 2015, nearby residents heard gunshots near the crime scene, but dismissed them due to the surrounding forest where hunting was permitted. Later, one neighbor, slightly alarmed by the shots followed by silence, chose not to alert the police. Another neighbor testified hearing screams in addition to the gunshots and observed a young man running towards a car parked nearby, chased by another individual. Hindered by trees, the witness couldn't see clearly, but witnessed the young man entering the car, followed by 2 more shots as the vehicle drove away. Minutes later, neighbors heard sirens wailing as police cars and emergency vehicles arrived at Rose's house. Soon after, an air ambulance helicopter landed on the lawn to pick up James, who was still alive. The scene resembled a movie shooting, leaving eyewitnesses bewildered and unable to comprehend what had occurred. Upon arrival, police encountered the elderly homeowner armed with a firearm, with another gun found in his bedroom later. Curtis provided his account of the events, initially considered the sole basis for the investigation. According to him, there was no indication of trouble at his house that day. He and his wife had been visiting their daughter, son-in-law, and grandchildren, along with a neighbor's child who had come to play. Curtis himself had been working in his trailer in the backyard, hearing gunshots but dismissing them like most neighbors, assuming they were hunters in the woods. His eldest grandson, Seth, suddenly appeared at the trailer, visibly excited and unannounced, informing him of a tragedy and urging him to call emergency services. Curtis accompanied Seth into the house, where he discovered the lifeless bodies of his wife and daughter. Concerned for the safety of the children present, he swiftly escorted them to a secluded area at the back of the house, shielding them from the unfolding horror. While calling emergency services, Curtis witnessed his grandson hastily leaving the house and sprinting towards the road. Assuming Seth was the assailant, Curtis grabbed his gun and pursued him. As Seth jumped into the car, Curtis fired 2 shots, with one bullet shattering the rear window and the other striking Seth in the left shoulder. Despite his injury, Seth managed to escape, but upon reaching the nearest house, he stopped to contact the police and report the incident. The investigating sheriff found the crime scene perplexing, unlike anything he had encountered before. In a news report, he highlighted the challenging task ahead for investigators to piece together the sequence of events. Following Seth Denton's arrest, determining his motive for such cruel actions against his family became paramount. Surprisingly, a motive was swiftly uncovered. Seth was raised primarily by his grandparents, as his mother, Toshi, had him at a young age and struggled with personal issues. Reports suggested Toshi dealt with bipolar affective disorder and sought treatment periodically. There was a likelihood Seth inherited this condition. From a young age, Seth harbored deep resentment towards his mother, whom he rarely saw. Over time, this resentment evolved into hatred, a sentiment Seth openly shared with friends and relatives. After completing school, Seth enlisted in the army. Upon returning home a year later, he resided with his grandparents. Eventually, he aspired for independence and relocated to the city, renting an apartment with a friend. Seth secured employment at a local fast food restaurant, though he was terminated shortly before the tragedy. Family and friends described Seth positively, highlighting his lack of violent tendencies, avoidance of negative influences, and adherence to the law. Despite Seth's positive traits, detectives believed his main motive for the crime stemmed from his negative feelings toward his mother and her spouse. The investigation revealed that around 5 p.m., Seth arrived at his grandparents' house wearing a camouflage jacket and carrying a semi-automatic rifle in his car. He left the car parked by the roadside, entered the house through the back door, and proceeded to shoot and kill his mother and grandmother while also severely injuring his stepfather. The sequence of shots fired was never established due to Seth's complete denial of guilt. Furthermore, it remained unclear why, instead of fleeing the scene, he left his jacket and rifle by the back door and requested his grandfather to call the police before heading to his grandfather's house. His mother and stepfather were likely his main targets, and he killed his grandmother to eliminate a witness. Evidence supporting Seth's guilt included his jacket and rifle discovered at the back door, blood traces on his shoes, and bullets in his car. Surprisingly, around 100 rounds of ammunition were found, raising questions about why he needed so much if he intended to kill only 2 people. Another peculiar aspect was the timing. According to the grandfather, Seth hastily fled the scene after they entered the house and witnessed the horrifying scene. Curtis then secured the children, contacted the police, retrieved his gun, and despite all this, managed to catch up with his grandson and shoot him twice. Not until 2016 did the young man testify in court, offering a perspective previously overlooked. Seth, stating his strong bond with his grandparents who raised him, actively avoided encounters with his mother. During his teenage years, he frequented shooting ranges with his grandfather, who also urged him to enlist in the army. Seth called his maternal Aunt Amanda, informing her of his plan to visit his grandparents, but expressing his desire to avoid encountering his mother. Unaware that Toshia and her husband were also visiting, Amanda assured Seth that he could visit without running into them. She later testified in court, confirming Seth's lack of knowledge about Toshia and James being at Rose's house. Seth had planned to go to the shooting range with his grandfather, hence why he brought a rifle with ample ammunition. Upon arriving at the house, he retrieved the gun and went directly to his grandfather's trailer. Showing him the rifle, they had a brief conversation before Curtis proceeded towards the house, still holding the rifle. Seth, expecting his grandfather to lead the way, followed closely, anticipating shooting targets together afterward. As Curtis entered the room, he began firing without warning, catching the occupants off guard, who made no attempt to flee or seek cover. Seth's legal team suggested Curtis may have experienced temporary insanity leading to the family members' deaths, but this explanation was deemed implausible and dismissed by the court. Despite traces of victims' blood found on the elderly man's clothing and shoes, he was inexplicably omitted from the list of suspects from the outset. The young man stood trial for the premeditated triple murder of his family members, facing the death penalty. Despite his grandfather's admission of willingness to kill him on that day, the court deemed this behavior justified. Curtis Rose, the grandfather and key witness, was neither taken into custody nor questioned as a suspect, and his account of the events was singularly accepted as truth. Furthermore, numerous overlooked details and inconsistencies delayed consideration of Seth's account until a year and a half later. While most physical evidence supported Curtis's testimony, aspects overlooked by investigators remained unaddressed. The central courtroom argument questioned Mr. Rose's motive for the murders of his wife, daughter, and son-in-law, dismissing the notion of temporary insanity as implausible. The lengthy trial spanned over a week, featuring the presentation of nearly 200 pieces of evidence and testimony from numerous witnesses, including neighbors, relatives, and family friends. The conflicting testimonies of the grandfather and grandson suggested deception from one party. Despite days of deliberation, the emotionally and physically drained jury unanimously declared the defendant guilty on all charges, expressing unwavering certainty in their verdict. Seth Denton, convicted of triple murder, spared death penalty, sentenced to life without parole for 50 years in Tennessee prison, maintains innocence. Tasha and James Milhorn's orphan children, entrusted to Aunt Amanda and Grandfather Curtis for care. Thanks for watching, guys. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and click the bell to stay updated on new stories from around the world. Bye.